Senator Braun, if you'd like to go, since you were here, and thank you for coming, that you can go next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually live on a farm and have practiced conservation my entire life. Watch with horror sometimes when I see what's happening, especially in the far west, to where it looks like agriculture is a long-term enterprise, and your main asset is your land and your water table. And when that starts going the wrong direction, I don't know how you strategically make the decisions of what you're going to do long-term. Most other businesses don't have that dynamic in play. So I'd like Mr. Mueller and Mr. Lewis to give me an idea, especially in maybe the near west. Are you in as bad a shape or impending as what we see through places like California, where I don't know how owning a farm there would look like you could say that's a long-term enterprise, you know, when you literally could run out of water. How far east is that situation for all of us to be concerned about in terms of what the future holds?
Well, Senator Braun, maybe I can take that, and then we can move further east to Kansas. I would tell you that our farmers in the high mountains of Colorado, our ranchers and farmers, deal with drought. They're used to dealing with drought on a fairly regular basis. Many of our ditches are direct supply ditches. We don't have the benefit of groundwater in our area. We're very heavily relying on surface water, snow runoff. Our farmers understand and our ranchers understand that when they look up at the mountains and they see a dry year, they're used to saying, well, that back 40 that's not as productive, I'm going to fallow it. I'm going to not irrigate that so that I can get the maximum bang out of my most productive fertile soils. And I think that's what we've seen over the last 22 years of this severe drought in Colorado. I'd say that we're just as bad off as California. We just maybe don't have as many people demanding it, but we are incredibly dry. I think that developing a program where we assist farmers on a programmatic scale to remove that marginal ag. And I would also say, you know, we have an awful lot of people who've moved into Colorado, just as in California, and getting some of our, what my real agricultural constituents would call hobby farmers, getting them to dry up their views in favor of food production with a little federal incentive would truly help us. So targeting those two areas in voluntary conservation programs would be tremendously helpful.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And I would say that it probably runs right through the middle of Kansas and Oklahoma, Texas, clear up to North Dakota. We often talk from a water standpoint about, at least in Kansas, it being two states, from a very semi-arid in the western part of the state, groundwater dominated, to much more rainfall, up to 45 inches in the eastern part of our state. In
up
the
to
west,
how much in the eastern part?
Up to 45 inches. We're at about 15 or 16 in the southwest portion, and about 45, so about three times
About
difference.
Indiana rainfall then.
That's right. And so, you know, the western third of our state, we are really in a water mining situation at this point. We have groundwater level declines, and it's like any real estate, it's about location. We've got some areas that are effectively dewatered. We've got other areas that are 25 or 50 years left. We've got areas close to the Oklahoma border that may have 200 years left. And so, you know, I think that making sure that we tailor whatever action we take to that individual area, that individual producer, is key to our long-term success. One thing that hasn't been hit on yet that I think is key is, and Mr. Wells talked about it just briefly, is crop varieties and crop genetics. We are seeing, even in the western part of our state, because of drought-tolerant crops, people that can be successful in certainly in a normal year, where 25 to 50 years ago that wasn't the case on a dry land situation. I think additional research dedicated to crop genetics that are more suited to the high plains would certainly make sure that we can keep those farmers viable for the long term.
Thank you. Dr. Schultz, I've been a tree farmer since the late 80s, and all I can tell you is it's great therapy for this current job. I go back to it every weekend. Forest ground has a little different dynamic. It's a longer horizon. The biggest thing I deal with would be invasive species, and we've got one called stiltgrass that once it gets into your woods, you don't even know that it's not native, and you do a poor harvest, and it's gone from your skid trails into enveloping the entire woods, and you can't even get a seedling that'll break through. And I know that you've got similar stuff in the West, cheatgrass, other stuff that you contend with. How big a deal is that, and how much has that become a problem in the recent past?
Yes, thank you, Senator Braun, for the question. My understanding, and I'll just caveat to say that that's a little bit outside of my expertise, but my understanding is that there'll be insect and disease outbreaks in our forests in the West, and they will have a variety of effects. So sometimes it'll mean that you'll get 2 cycles of insects in a year because it's warmer instead of 1, or you'll have situations where because you don't get a hard freeze, the larvae don't die, so that'll exacerbate it. But I think part of what happened when we saw a massive die-off in California a few years ago was that there was an insect outbreak and it weakened the trees and stressed them. And then in addition to the drought and heat conditions, it caused a huge mortality event. And then that can interact with fire in some tricky ways as well.
Well, very good. I think whenever something becomes weak or the climate's not in sync, you now have that issue, less for row crop farming, but a big deal for forest management. Thank you.
Senator Braun, I really appreciate